Отож, я буду намагатися.
So I'm going to give my presentation in Ukrainian, and today we'll talk about global trends in the nut market. I will give you a global picture of what the situation in the nut market, so that you have a general idea. And then after this, our speakers will give greater detail on the situation both in Georgia and in Ukraine for specific nut cultures. So, the dynamics or the trends in nut crops production is one of growth. We can see that the growth is there's 100% growth. Here we see almonds, walnut, pistachio, and hazelnuts, and the trend is upwards. We see that roughly 7% production growth per year is observed. We see that world trade is not growing to the same degree. In fact, we only see 2% annual trade growth. In other words, nut production is growing faster than global trade. In other words, there's more and more nuts on the market. And what does that mean? That means that there's quite a bit of pressure on world prices. And what we see over the past 10 years is that there's a drop in global prices. Here are the main nut cultures that are grown. So pistachio, unshelled pistachio, hazelnut, almond, and so forth. However, I would like to point out that not all, so despite the dynamic growth in sales, that doesn't mean that the markets are expanding. For example, if we look at almonds, the average yearly annual growth is just 1%. However, the market is over $5 billion per year. There's a different situation with unshelled hazelnuts. Here there's more dynamic growth, almost 20% per year, but the market itself is quite a bit smaller, just a bit over $140 million. And what does this mean? What's good about this is that low prices enhance consumption. And so we made a comparison between 2014 and 2020 and observed that consumption of almost all nuts has grown. Most popular are almonds and walnuts. This is the import trends for the largest 10 importing countries. And here we can see that EU countries like Germany and Spain, France, Italy are the largest importers of almonds. And so they have 13, 10, and 6% of the import market. But we also see that in each country there is a drop in the past year of imports. But I would like to point out once again that we're talking about import of value and not in terms of tons. If we look at the tons of import, we see that there's a very small growth in imports. So that means that each year nuts, in particular almonds, are becoming cheaper each year. And so if we're planning for the long term, we need to keep in consideration, take into account this global trend. A somewhat better situation observed in hazelnut import. There's more concentrated trade in hazelnuts, and over 50% of imports are in the EU. But in Germany, Germany is growing its import over the past season. The same situation, the same negative trend in imports is observed for walnuts. But in Kazakhstan and Korea, so more Asian countries, they are becoming more interested, at least in terms of the past 2 seasons. They are growing their increasing imports of walnuts, in particular from China. As for factors that are affecting world trade that we need to take into consideration, first of all, recovery of demand after the pandemic, because we know that demand dropped due to the pandemic, and a significant role was due to increased air travel, because in airports the main snack is nuts. Another factor is the Russia's invasion of Ukraine, because this has put inflationary pressure on food prices and utilities worldwide, 9.9% in the Eurozone. And this, of course, contributes to the increase in the cost of living of consumers of nut crops. And so they try to buy groceries that cost less. And so we expect a drop in demand for expensive nuts such as pistachios or macadamias, which don't grow in Georgia. But perhaps this will positively affect almonds, because it is more of a mass product and is the cheapest of these nut cultures. In this way, expensive snacks are losing popularity, while the confectionery industry is suffering from high electricity prices. And so factories are lowering their production in Europe due to high energy costs. And of course, there's a growing cost of transportation during the pandemic, and these costs remain very high. Deglobalization is occurring, and trade is dropping. It's becoming more local. And so this means that production is becoming more and more industrial, and also quality is improving. And of course, we know about the Green Deal, because it is expected that the conditions which European producers work in will be applied automatically to EU importers. And the US is concerned about this, and so we need to watch this situation very carefully. But this is the current situation at the moment. Now let's look at the situation in the market. You all probably know that world production this year for almonds has dropped a bit. However, there's no hope that export will increase, because once again, logistics are very important. There's drop in demand in the main importing countries. And for example, Australia and the US are producing a lot. According to the latest information, they're having difficulties exporting their products, and Spain is importing less. In Australia, production hasn't changed much, but they hope to have more. They hope to export more due to growing demand in China. A similar situation is observed in the hazelnut market. There's weaker demand and pressure on prices. There's production growth in Turkey, however, due to inflation in Turkey. This is making their exports. It's making exports harder to. So exports are dropping in Turkey due to high energy prices, despite the inflation occurring in their country, and depreciation of the Turkish lira. So this situation is affecting both Georgia and Turkey. And let's now look at the situation with walnuts, where we see a pole shift, because China has begun increasing its production and export, and now they are taking Central Asian countries under their export influence. We see a drop in production in Ukraine due to the invasion, and we see export growing from Turkey. And even in Azerbaijan and Iraq, we see a growth in imports. And this is interesting for the Caucasus market of walnut production, in particular Georgia. So if we take all of this into consideration, we need to be very careful about investing in nut growing, and we need to be prepared for difficult times ahead. And what conclusions can we make at the end? The growth of production of major nut crops outstrips the growth of trade, and this puts pressure on prices. What's also important is that a stronger dollar means more expensive imports from the US. And perhaps this creates an opportunity for local producers or regional producers, but at the same time, the US provides a particular level of quality that importers are used to, and so we need to match this quality. And of course, we need to focus on producing high-quality processed goods. And finally, high inflation forces consumers to abandon expensive nuts, which opens up opportunities for more affordable varieties of nuts. So I tried to give you a general picture of the market, the world markets at the current time.
You don't mind, so you'll need translation. But in the recent months, I've seen a lot of people actually learning Ukrainian, even in Georgia. That was really amazing. Переключаюсь на українську мову. Вітаю всіх.
I'll turn to Ukrainian now. I'm speaking Ukrainian for the first time in a Ukrainian conference in Georgia. But we planned to do this before the war began. Even last year, we planned to conduct this conference in Georgia because we truly value the experience that our Georgian partners and nut producers have accumulated. And we see a very fast, rapid development in the production and format of nut production in Georgia. And we have a YouTube channel where we have videos from Georgian plantations, and we see a very high level of interest in the region. There's a lot of interest from viewers and potential nut producers, and so we wanted to highlight these developments. Unfortunately, we weren't able to conduct this event at the scale we'd like, but we hope that after Ukraine's victory, we will return to our old format where there's a lot of nut producers from Ukraine who come to visit Georgia and see how you are producing nuts. And we would also like to invite you to Ukraine when it's safe there, because we also have a lot to share and teach others. Now I'd like to move on to my presentation. And I've been asked to talk about the Ukrainian nut market, but I cannot begin without telling you about more global aspects and say a bit more about what Kateryna mentioned. Because in order to understand the trends in each country, we need to look at the global tendencies, the global trends. And I'm unable to do otherwise. So basically, the first thing that we need to remember, that is that nuts are the largest category of agricultural trade in the fruit market, even larger than bananas. It's easier to move nuts around than fresh fruits because they don't spoil, they're easier to move around, and their price is relatively high. And so the transportation costs don't have so much of an impact on international trade as for cheaper goods. That's the first factor. The second is that as we analyze nuts, we should treat nuts as a group of fruits which include, for example, peanuts, which in essence is not a nut. However, it's used and treated as a nut. So it's actually not a classical nut, but we need to include it in the nut category. Let's move forward. You can see the international trade structure on the graph that I showed. So this graph answers many questions, and you can look through these presentations later because we will send them to you. We'll take pictures of these presentations, but I'd like to point out a few important factors. This is the volume of international trade compared to the overall international trade market. I'm talking about international trade and international production. So what we see is that international production is quite low quality. And when we add it all together, we get a picture that doesn't tell us much because we make a lot of, it can cause us to make a lot of mistakes. And so if we look at the numbers for international trade, that actually gives us more information. There we can see how demand is changing. And demand is the main driver of production. If there's demand for your good, then you will produce more of it. Everything's simple. And so, looking at this graph, we can see a very interesting thing. We've always talked about four classic nuts. So, in our region at least. So, walnuts, hazelnuts, first of all, and also almonds and pistachio. So, four nuts that everyone's heard of. But in the past 5 years in international trade, cashew was the main nut. And so we can't put aside cashew because it's a competitor of all other nuts. And I'd also like to remind you, of course, about the cheapest nut, peanut, the peanut. And so we have 6 nuts of interest. And here is the situation that I think will enter marketing textbooks of the future, business textbooks of the future, and that is the story of the cashew nut. 5 years ago, we were saying that that trade and production of cashew is growing at crazy speed and moving faster than all other nuts. But then what happened is something impossible to believe. Because this nut is mainly produced in developing countries in Asia, first of all, and then production began in African countries, which are also very poor. This nut gained particular state importance, and these relatively poor states began providing government subsidies to local producers. And what happens when subsidies occur? When subsidies are used, you make the situation worse for producers. I'm talking about direct subsidies. And so what happened is that this nut began being produced in very large amounts, and competition moved towards the price. So price competition began. It was a race to the bottom, and by 2020, when international trade shut down because of COVID, Asia shut down first, and this nut was produced in such large amounts, and it couldn't be sent anywhere. And so it began spoiling. They began destroying orchards in poor countries. And one other problem with the subsidizing production in poor countries, they typically don't have a reserve of production capacity that you see in more wealthy countries that allow them to survive difficult times. And so over the past couple years, cashew has flattened out and began dropping. So production is dropping and international trade in cashew is dropping. However, cashews have a future. This is simply an example of how not to do business. So you never need to engage in price competition. You need to engage in quality competition. You need to produce high quality nuts that you can sell for a high price. And the other part of this graph are the so-called small nuts. So macadamia nuts, areca, Brazil nuts, chestnuts, which are very important, in particular for the Caucasus region, and the kola nut. They account for a small percentage of international nut trade. But I have a story about macadamia nuts. My son was studying in school with a girl from Africa, and she said that in her country they could grow macadamia. This could be a good business for their country. And 1 year later, I heard that her family had just begun creating a macadamia orchard, which is a very good idea because there's a growing demand for macadamia nuts. And so it's a good opportunity to observe these trends. And I've heard that Georgia, for example, is taking advantage of growing demand for pistachio. And this is one of the most profitable nuts for international trade. Of course, there are many nuances, and I've seen videos of how pistachios are grown in California, and you can watch them and learn quite a bit. So this picture of international trade shows that demand for peanut is growing faster than any other nuts. And this isn't even a nut, so to speak. And because our conference is Ukrainian run, I would like to mention that over the past few years, peanuts have gained more and more interest from Ukrainian producers. So Ukrainian has a lot of potential and interest in peanut production. And in Uzbekistan, where we also work, one of the most important export markets is peanuts. So pay attention to this very important and interesting nut culture, both for internal consumption and for export. So I'd like to move now to the Ukrainian market. I am often happy to see, I see that Ukraine is a kind of northern nut anomaly. Why do I call it an anomaly? An anomaly? Because most nut producers worldwide have a milder climate than Ukraine. They have a longer growing season than Ukraine. And nonetheless, Ukraine is one of the world leaders in terms of walnut export. And this is truly hard to believe. You might think, okay, walnut, that makes sense. But then Ukraine took the first place in hazelnut production. And this was also a surprise all over the world among nut specialists that I've spoken to. And perhaps you know, and I'm sure Ukrainians know, perhaps Georgians don't know, but Ukraine is currently talking about expanding its almond orchards and experimenting with varieties that are adapted to the Ukrainian climate. However, currently walnuts account for more than 99% of all nut exports from Ukraine. So if we had at least 1% of hazelnuts, or maybe 10% of hazelnuts and almonds, that would be very good. And I would like to remind you once again what the history of this business can teach us, particularly the history of cashews. It's important to engage in quality competition, not price competition. So we need to strive for higher quality. It's no good to lower your prices to compete for low prices. I don't remember what year the association was created in 2008. Okay, in 2008, through my initiative, we had the first Ukrainian nut conference, and at this conference, the Ukrainian Nut Association was created. And we, at the time, talked about nuts as an expensive, exclusive consumer product. You can remember, I think, how much walnuts cost in Georgia. But I forgot to say why we want to conduct this conference in Georgia. Because I don't know any other country in the world that eats so much nuts, so many walnuts as Georgia. I've seen walnuts everywhere, in desserts, in soups, in snacks, in different dishes. I've never seen a country use so many nuts. So I think at the time, in 2008, it seemed like nuts were an exclusive, highly expensive good. But since then, we've seen that nuts have become a mass product. And when you have a mass product, that means you have a large assortment and a large choice. And when you have a large choice, what do you choose? You choose the more high-quality goods. Now, let's talk about some trends in walnut export from Ukraine. So, over the past 2 years, 2 or 3 years, in the global market, Ukraine is taking the place. Ukraine is being replaced by China, which is taking more and more of the market. We see exporters from Georgia and Central Asia who are also growing their export volumes. And after the collapse in price earlier in the 2000s, prices have somewhat recovered. And so when you're calculating the price for the past over the past 5 years, you need to take 10 cents off the price per kilo for each year. And this gives you a more accurate picture. And Kateryna talked about the drop in price. And when we see that we're on the brink of a global recession or even depression, we can see that the prospects might be quite difficult for nut prices, above all. So I'd like to talk about walnut export in Ukraine. And as I said, it's over 99% of all nut exports in Ukraine. And that includes shelled and unshelled nuts. I've also mentioned peanuts. So I'd like to now talk about what will happen after Ukraine's victory in the war. Nobody knows what will happen with the nut market, but I think it's fairly safe to assume that what we might see is we don't know what the macroeconomic situation in the world will be, and in Ukraine. We can't know this a few years in advance. But if there's money and if there's investment in the sector, and we expect that there will be limited investments in this due to the high cost of credit, I think that investment will be made in other types of agriculture. As we see, agriculture is blocked in Ukraine. The ports are blocked. The partial unblocking of ports for the grain deal has not solved the issue. And so we're going to see increasing interest in projects that can recover their investments as quickly as possible. And so perhaps for a period of time, there will be a drop in activity in the nut market. As for the internal domestic market, most of all, we expect a drop in demand. Perhaps exports will grow, in fact, but because they'll need liquidity, and producers that already have orchards and who are able to preserve them, those who have their own production, their own processing plants, I think they will be in a good position. We also need to take into consideration global trends. As I mentioned, we are on the brink of a global recession or even depression, and this can negatively impact the trends in the nut market worldwide. However, everything is changing very quickly, and the U.S. has an important impact. As you know, in California, there are water problems, and production is dropping in the U.S., and so this could help renew Ukrainian nut production. And so it's hard to predict what will happen. Now, what is happening in China also has a large impact. If there's a recession in China, perhaps consumption in China will drop, but export will increase. And this can also affect the world prices, the world nut prices. Now, I'd like to say a few words about our project, where to find out more information about us. EastFruit side has nut prices. It has descriptions, market descriptions. There's information in Ukrainian, English, and Russian, and also Uzbek. So I invite you to look at our research and learn more about us. The marketplaces that we have over 30,000 participants in. There's a marketplace for producers, those who have nurseries, who sell seedlings, and so forth. We also have our Facebook page, which you know about. Thank you for your attention, and if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Nika Japaridze, UN consultant, market analyst, and fruit team member. Before I start my presentation, I would like to wish my Ukrainian friends rapid win and peace in their country. So our speakers will describe the main specifics of Georgian market in their presentations, so I will be quite concise today. My presentation is mainly based on the official statistics and the trends and the opportunities that we can see from the statistics. I will not be speaking about current season. The following speakers from the local associations will provide much more interesting information. First of all, I would like to stress how important it is these nuts crops are important for Georgian economy. Within the recent 8 years, Georgian farmers have received over 6 billion USD revenues from the sales of nuts, and 0.5 billion comes from the hazelnuts. And that's interesting because in our country with a tradition of grape growing, the hazelnuts are already approaching these values the same, and also it's their volume is much bigger than apple, nectarine, pear, etc. So we can see that our market is quite large, and but when we have a large market, so we always have a suspicion whether it's possible or not to grow further. But statistics shows that from our nuts, it's very important to have opportunity to grow further, which will mean more revenues for the local producers. We have mainly 3 crops. This is hazelnut, walnut, and almond in the Georgian market, and I will go through them one by one. Hazelnut is the main export crops, and Georgia actually is exporting hazelnut produced here. If farmers have received about 500 million revenue from this export, but added value was created by the exporters, and country has received about 1 billion of revenues from this export. The hazelnut market can be even bigger in Georgia. So we shall look at the price differences between Turkey and Georgia. We know that Turkey is the main supplier at the global markets, and Turkish prices, FOB prices, are higher, 10 to 20% higher than Georgian prices. And as we have seen, this is mainly due to the difference in quality. That has already been mentioned by our previous speakers. If we will recalculate how much bigger revenues can be received by Georgia, if we would they be able to sell at the same price as Turkey, we can see that during the last 8 years, the revenues from the exports of the shelled nuts should be about $130 billion. That's about 10% of the total export. And so therefore, the hazelnut market has very big potential of growth if we will be concentrating on the quality improvement. So let's switch to the walnuts. Unlike hazelnut, walnut is mainly consumed locally. Georgia actually is not practically is not exporting walnut, but it will change very soon because very huge investments were performed in walnut in Georgia, and the walnut is fourth most popular investment product in the program, under the program that is supported by the state. And it is interesting that per capita consumption in Georgia is 2-3 times higher than in the developed markets, and therefore additional sales of increasing local market will be quite difficult. So therefore we have such opportunities who will be taking this hazelnut walnut from the orchards. They will have opportunity to export this. Also the marketing companies have big opportunities because the walnut will need quite a serious marketing in order to take its niche at the global markets. So also the statistics also show us one or more opportunity. In Georgia, productivity, despite the recent investments, the walnut productivity is very low. So therefore, the country has an opportunity to grow productivity in already existing orchards, and if you're going to develop new orchards, you should know that you should be concentrating on the productivity, because it will make you more competitive, which will be better for both for you and for the country. Let's speak about the almonds. Almonds for Georgian market, this is a news in the Georgian market, but the almond will grow very rapidly and very actively. With the support of the state, the almond is the second most popular product from the standpoint of investment within the recent years. According to local association, within the next 6 to 7 years, production of almond will increase tenfold. We will have following opportunities. Everybody understands that the local market won't be able to consume so much almond, so they should be exported. We have analogically the same situation as with the walnuts here, because we can establish such companies that will be exporting Georgian almond and almond products to the foreign markets. Also, marketing will be important here exactly for the same reasons as it was for the walnut. It is interesting that consumption of almond in Georgia is very low. So almond is more consumed in the high revenue countries, but also we have some low revenue countries which consume twice as much almond as Georgia per capita. I mean, so therefore it will be there will be opportunities to popularize almond in the local market too. I will now I would like to discuss with you the recent dynamics existing in this. As Kateryna said, inflation is a global problem currently. It's a problem for Georgia too, and for Georgian farmers. Due to the global crisis, the prices are going down, and high inflation means that farmer prices are reduced, and so they can buy much less product on the same amount than they could do it in the 2014. But that's a global challenge, you can't avoid it. However, we have very good forecast. IMF says that in a couple of years, Georgia will hit its inflation target, which is 3%, which means that the prices won't go down, maybe, but the rapid growth of the prices will stop in the Georgian market. Thank you for your attention.
Доброго дня, шановні колеги.
Hello, dear colleagues, or as our Ukrainian hosts love to say, Gamarjoba Genotsvale. Because Ukraine and Georgia have a great tradition, common traditions, common interests, and we are united by a desire to be free. And in our countries, at our war fronts, we have a very strong Georgian volunteer group, volunteer battalion, which is the strongest of all volunteer battalions fighting in the war in Ukraine. So thank you very much. Today's conference is a step towards peace with our partners around the world. And thank you very much to the hosts of this conference and to the FAO project, the team of which has created this project in Georgia for us in this very difficult time. Georgia today is in the top 5, one of the top 5 leaders in terms of hazel exports. So we have a lot to learn from them. Who are we? As Andriy said, in 2008, the Ukrainian Nut Association was established. And now it is a nut industry association that brings together growers, exporters, nurseries, in which cover over 13,000 hectares of lands, of orchards. I would like to present my colleagues Maxim Sheko, who is a powerful producer, who has a great orchard of hazelnuts in Ukraine, Vadim Boyko, who, together with his team, is implementing state-of-the-art growing methods. Our colleague who is working together with you, with our Georgian colleagues here in Georgia. We are working constantly in Ukraine. We're constantly working on the global objective of renewing a state program of nut growing. We would like to promote the nut sector in the global markets. Here we are showing the vector of our efforts in the forms of 3 big fish. These are the 3 vectors of our operations, the 3 directions. Walnuts, walnuts, hazelnuts, and almonds. You can see on the screen that currently the area covered by walnuts and hazelnut orchards is almost identical. And almond orchards occupy a very small territory, but almonds are a new area of work which has over 200 hectares and is growing. And these are the 3 big fish that I should have shown earlier by pressing the button. On this diagram, you can see that 10 years ago, practically 10 years ago, we began planting walnut trees. But We had powerful growth only over the last 5 years. In the past 5 years, we have made walnuts the main nut crop. Before that, hazelnuts were in the first place. And moving forward, we expect the area covered by walnut orchards to grow. And as Andriy said in his presentation, the difficulties that we've faced in 2021 due to COVID has stopped because of the war. However, as we look forward to the trends in planting in the future, we expect that we will have 30,000 hectares by 2030. Most of this will be hazelnuts. Also, over the past 5 years, a new line of production has begun, and that is organic nut orchards. Especially over the past 5 years, we've seen a growth in planting, and next year we expect to begin exporting our first shipments of organic nuts. And we think that by 2030, no less than 20% of our exports will be organic hazelnuts. As you can see, the state program of supporting nut production has helped us a lot over the past 4 years. And this helped us in 4 ways. The first is that 44% there's been a 44% compensation of costs for planting. The state has also covered some of the expenses having to do with equipment. And this program, unfortunately, is no longer operational, but it has created the conditions for us to plant almost half of all the nut orchards in Ukraine. We see that the brand of health food is only beginning to gain importance in Ukraine. We see that we're the second place. We're in the second place of nut exports. We've only sent our first shipment of organic hazelnuts. But next, for domestic production, we've only produced our first shipment, our first group of organic hazelnuts, and next year we expect to export our first shipment. So over the past 5 years, we see the same trends. EU markets have bought both nuts, walnuts, and also unshelled walnuts. Nothing has changed. However, we see that there's been a slowdown in export that has affected us. However, prices have begun to grow. Because last year, because of we saw the first shipment of orchard walnuts. The problems in our sector are that 90% of our nuts were gathered, were harvested in household orchards and roadside orchards, and that has not allowed us to have the right level of quality for exports. We don't have uniform quality in our products, but now we are uniting our orchards. We're bringing quality in line with expectations, and this is making exports more profitable. Quality is the top objective of our program for walnuts. One of the important aspects of improving quality is exporting organic nuts, creating a pool of organic nuts. And we have over 800 hectares which are going to be exporting organic nuts abroad. So yes, we will continue collecting. We will continue using nuts produced by households and roadside orchards, but these nuts will be used mainly for processed goods. For example, nut oils, nut pastes, and using nuts in food processing. As we saw in the previous slide, we are lowering our exports of unshelled nuts, and we're increasing our exports of processed nuts, shelled nuts. So what's happening with hazelnuts? Hazelnuts are being imported into Ukraine. Over 1,500 tons of exports, hazelnuts are being imported by Ukraine, which is coming in part from Georgia. But look at the prices. They're very attractive. And so there's hope that when the war ends, this direct corridor, which is logistically most convenient between Odessa and Batumi, will allow Ukraine to import Georgian hazelnuts directly into the country. Let's look at almonds now. Almonds are consumed by Ukrainians even greater amounts, and so we import quite a bit each year, and we hardly have any harvestable almond orchards in the country yet. It'll take another 3 or 4 years, but we visited Georgian almond orchards in Udabno, for example, and we hope that these nuts will be imported from Batumi to Odessa, which will be the best import route for Ukraine. And also look at the attractive prices. What are our steps to developing our strategy? First of all, we need to cover our internal demand. We need to create, after looking at our Georgian colleagues' certificates, we also need to have a registry of orchards. We need to have a certification process, and we need to look forward towards creating this type of system. We need to focus on cooperation. We need to focus on processing, which is in an embryonic state. And so that is our task for the coming years. Also, we have hazelnut orchards that are working according to organic standards, and they will be included in the organic nut pools as well. We'll have 5 regional nut plants to process nuts, and we need to have 5, and we have 3 already. One is in Odessa at the feedback nut producer. There's one in Khmelnytsky region, and one is in the central part of the country. processing hazelnuts is a very important field of work for us. And we have begun producing our first hazelnut oil, hazelnut paste, and hazelnut flour, or hazelnut meal. And if we have already worked on rebranding our walnut exports, and we have we need to have two nut brands that are recognized worldwide in hazelnuts and in almonds. This is something we've been working on quite a bit and will continue promoting in external markets by participating in international exhibitions in which we're helped by the International Trade Center project, which operates in Ukraine. And currently we have a representative office of Sial, and so we're no longer asked whose hazelnut you're supplying when we visit these different trade shows, because they know that we have our own producer now. One of the important ways of promoting our activities is through our website, our association's website, where we present all our achievements, all of our developments over the recent years. Also, we have a catalog which we publish in English, and this is the only publication that shows all the structure of our nut sector in Ukraine. The leading producers of hazelnuts, walnuts, and almonds, and the producers of equipment that operate in the sector. As for our future, moving forward, what do we expect to see? We expect to see more and more commercial orchards with high-tech equipment that are producing results. We expect to see cooperation between large and small producers to increase commercial trade volumes of high-quality nuts. And that includes traceable, high-quality, identifiable goods. And of course, once again, nut processing. So I'd like to thank you now for your attention. But first of all, I'd like to thank you for supporting us.
Доброго дня, гамаджоба.
Good morning. I'm a Ukrainian specialist in growing nuts, and I've learned a lot in Georgia from about nut production. I've also observed nut production, especially hazelnut production development in Ukraine. And after I began taking interest in this, specialists told me to visit Turkey and Georgia to see how it's done. And that's how our story, how our background developed in Georgia. What are the particular features of Ukrainian production that we can learn from Georgia? And that's the subject of my presentation. Considering how production is developing in Ukraine, cooperation is developing in Ukraine between Ukraine and Georgia, which started in 2016. We know the Hazelnut Grower Association, and they have shown us what is done in hazelnut production in Georgia. They showed us how intensive orchards are operating in Georgia. After studying the experience in Georgia, we came to the conclusion that we can begin our own production, and we created hazelnut orchards using the same varieties that are produced in Georgia. And with Italian specialists, we laid the groundwork for Tonjufon variety hazelnut. And starting in 2016, we have planted roughly 3,000 hectares of commercial Tondojofoni variety hazelnuts. And from 5,000 new hectares, most is covered by this variety. Traditionally, walnuts are produced in Ukraine. The other culture that has been produced since Soviet times is hazelnuts. Moving forward, we see that almond production is just getting started, and there is a lot of room for it to grow. I'd like to point out the comparison of conditions for growing nuts in Georgia and Ukraine. Georgia is a warmer country, and it has sections that have subtropical climate, which is ideal for many types of nut production. Ukraine has colder climates, has a colder winter, and so the climate is more difficult for hazelnut production, as Andriy Yarmak has shown. It is a miracle that Ukraine is able to produce so much nuts. At the same time, when we analyze what's happening around the world, when we analyze the EastFruit project, for example, when we see what's happening in California, top orchards in Turkey and Italy, we came to the conclusion that walnut should be a lateral direction of work, and so we have developed walnut production with large walnuts, and we have the best condition for large walnut production, and it's called variety Inter. Also analyzing what's taking place in Italy and Georgia, we haven't seen the same type of large nuts. Another important factor governing or that's affecting production of nuts in Georgia is the state policy. As we know, there's a program for nut producers called Planning for the Future, Plant the Future. And in Ukraine, it's not as easy to begin as it is in Georgia. In terms of funding, in Georgia, there are many credit programs that help producers to create orchards. There's partial compensation for seedlings and nursery, and also there's some compensation of equipment costs. In Ukraine, nothing of the type exists, unfortunately. As for land use in Georgia is private. There's private property. But in Ukraine, unfortunately, only last year did the land market begin developing. Of course, the pandemic affected the situation, and of course, the current war has halted development in the agricultural land market for the nearest future. And this makes it difficult to create orchards. We have lands where annual crops are developed and grain crops, but Georgia doesn't have the same program for developing grains. And so we need to create conditions in Ukraine for perennial crop development. In Georgia, the situation is better with perennials. If we look at soil fertility is good in Ukraine for crops such as grains and corn, and producers aren't quite as interested in nut production because it may take 10 years for their investments to pay for themselves. In Georgia, the situation is slightly better, but considering what I've said already, not all lands are used for orchard, for horticulture. The main share of horticulture lands there are risks related to horticulture orchards that affect the field as well, the sector as well. As for processing, in Ukraine, those who have created commercial orchards, as Henadiy Yudin said, we have already 3 modern processing plants. We don't have this. We have good cooperation between producers and processors, which is an advantage that we have. And so, new producers of nuts can count on these processors that already exist, and they can get bank funding, bank credits and loans for developing their own processing plants. So let's look at logistics now. Germany, France, and Belgium, and the Netherlands are the main logistic hubs for Ukraine, and there are some customs barriers, but generally logistics with the EU is fairly good. And so that's a comparative analysis between Georgia and Ukraine. As for climatic conditions, here on this map you can see the zones where favorable nut growing conditions. The yellow zone has the best climate conditions for nuts. The green area, the light green area, is best for, the green area is best for nut production because it has high soil fertility and high enough precipitation. The yellow zone has lower precipitation. The dark green area has some hazelnut production, and if we look at the nut production in western Ukraine, there is a high humidity in western Ukraine and fairly high fertility, and it's similar to Kateryna in terms of nut production capabilities. There's also irrigation in Kateryna, which makes it more similar to western Ukraine. The yellow Black Sea region is fairly favorable for nut production. The Ukrainian Nut Association has chosen particular varieties of walnuts, which are most favorable for organic nut production. Because these varieties are resistant to pests. They are very due to their structure, and considering that there are varieties that are resistant to disease and to pests, they can be grown and used for organic exports because they meet European market, European and American standards for for organic nuts, which are grown without pesticides. And so we're going to continue growing the market of organic nut production. So we don't have very many we don't have very many orchards that have organic standards standard certificates yet, and we need to work on this in the coming years. We see that the Yarivsky variety of walnut has high quality. Here's another variety of nut kernel. It has an amber color. It's organic, and it also deserves attention in terms of production and sales. In Ukraine, we have seedlings that have organic certificates from the very beginning of the creation of the orchard. Ukraine has companies which have received certificates for their bio remedies for improving soil quality, and they can be used in technologies of orchard creation, and they help to reduce pests and diseases. Here are the companies that have been and the products that have been used now for several years in walnut production, and in the future these will be used also in hazelnut production. Certification of organic orchards, of course, takes years. You cannot do this in a single year. And so we're in a kind of transition period, and there are three stages of certifying an orchard, and each stage takes 1 year or more. A classical organic orchard requires a particular type of mechanical equipment, because of course fighting pests cannot be done with pesticides, and so the orchards need to be weeded. You can obtain the certification for nut cores and for unshelled nuts. And it's important to make sure that nut producers fulfill all of the requirements in order to export their products to Europe. As for blanching, we don't have much Chandler walnuts, and so we have begun blanching walnuts. In Georgia, for example, hazelnuts are blanched traditionally, but in Ukraine this is a new line of work, a new field of work. As for final products, we have walnut oil, for example, and considering the number of oil producers in Ukraine, of which I've counted over 10, these are producers that produce both organic oil nuts, cold-pressed walnut oils, and in the future they plan to produce hazelnut oil. As for certificates, most of our exporters use the HCCP certificates standards. Ukraine has a number of nurseries that produce seedlings to create new orchards, and the varieties are used which have the right quality of nut cores and the right maturity qualities. And in our experience, we base our practices on the Moldovan experience, because Moldova traditionally was an orchard-based country which has the most experience in nut production. They were the first to begin producing nuts, and we have gained a lot from their experience. We have studied hazelnut production in Italy and Turkey, but we've learned the most from Georgia because there are long traditions and conditions that are closest to ours. And so we create plantations based on Georgian seedlings. This is an example of in vitro seedling production at our nurseries. We constantly support each other, and we have meetings with our Georgian colleagues to learn from their experience. And so the subject of my presentation was what we can learn from Georgia. We can learn from their hazelnut production and also walnuts and how to use walnuts in the national cuisine, and also how to process nuts.
Good afternoon. My greetings to all of you. I would like to thank Ms. Kateryna for inviting me, for giving me opportunity to speak about our sector. I would like to welcome our guests from Ukraine, thank our partners for a big honor of this is really unforgettable gesture and present. I would like to welcome Ms. Taisia, who arrived based on the invitation. Thank you very much for finding time in such a difficult period and joining us. We will try to make your visit valuable, and I hope that we will be able to provide very interesting information from you. And I would like to wish victory to Ukraine, first of all. Glory to Ukraine. I would like to set some specific points which I will be discussing. So I would like to inform you, first of all, about the outline of my presentation, because we have quite a huge audience here. We have hazelnut growers, our partners from different countries, so everybody has might have interest in different parts of the presentation. But okay, we will speak about hazelnut sector, about the global markets, challenges existing at the global markets, which were already partly described by Mr. Andriy. And we will also focus on the challenges existing in Georgia. And the goal of discussing these challenges, we have two goals in discussing these challenges. First of all, I would like to share our experience with our Ukrainian colleagues in order this might allow them to avoid these challenges or address them timely. Also, there is a very important component which is about our customers, clients, and when we are speaking about Georgia and Georgian hazelnut, we also very often speak about the accompanying risks, which are quality related, and I would like to discuss this, how we are planning to mitigate, reduce these risks, and how we are planning to increase the quality and quantity of our production. This will be mainly the contents of my presentation. So, hazelnut sector in Georgia. Hazelnut orchards in Georgia are mainly built in the western part. However, very strongly and intensively is developing this hazelnut growing in Kakheti region, and actually the number of orchards and the areas covered by them is daily increasing in Kakheti. That's very interesting. I want to stress, we think that we have about 70,000 hectares of hazelnut orchards. However, I would like to welcome Mr. Gela, and I would like to thank Ministry of Agriculture for the special project that is being implemented now. And for the first time in history of Georgia, we are able to map our sector, our hazelnut sector, and to create registry of our hazelnut orchards, which is very important for each of us. As for the varieties, I have divided them in a very simply, but of course there are sub-varieties, but mainly we have Anaklia variety, which is of Georgian origin, and they quite intensively, since company Ferrero entered Georgia, since that Gifon variety was spread very actively in Georgia, and that I personally 80% of my orchards are built based on the Italian saplings, and we see that daily share of Italian varieties in our orchards is daily increasing. So this is general overview of the sector. Exporting companies, we have quite a lot of exporting companies in Georgia. However, we think actually there are over 40 large processing facilities that are exporting hazelnuts to Europe, Middle East, United States, etc. And we are actually covering all the types of the products. We are producing natural hazelnut, roast, blanched, granulized, milled hazelnut, and actually we are actually fully covering the hazelnut processing cycle. I want also to say that we are having this at a very high standard, and we can compete with the quality of the products, both with Turkish and European producers. The capacity of our processing facilities and of sector is actually twice as big as our production, which means that we have a potential to increase the growth in our country, and because we have capacities to process bigger volumes, and so we are trying somehow to keep up in the production with the processing. So I have said about the main export areas. We have years already exporting to Italy and Germany, but also these main areas are having the biggest share in EU exports, but we also are sending hazelnut to China, to United States, and we are also trying to establish our first business relations, at least at the corporate level, to establish business relations with Ukraine, and I think that we will be able to achieve very interesting results. However, within these recent years, we have exported about 205 tons of hazelnuts to Ukraine. Now I will speak about challenges. Current year, both within the country and also the global market, we had a very difficult season this year. We had a lot of challenges. First of all, due to the excessive precipitation, quantity and quality reduced drastically. We have about 30% decline in production, and I think that this year we'll produce about 40,000 tons only, while last year we produced 55,000 tons, and that's a big challenge. And despite very actively discussing this issue, and despite 5-year unstopped struggle with this stink bug still is remaining in Georgia, and it has spread over Kateryna, and we continue to fight with this pest, but unfortunately not with much success so far. However, our vision for this mitigation is becoming better and better, and we are reducing the cost per hectare for fight of this with the stink bug, and I hope that within this year we will try. So we will try to reduce the impact of this pest on the quality of our produce. So we had some decline in the world market, decline in demand. One of the reasons was the war, because it created certain energy-related risks, and European market stopped accumulating stock, and they are performing just-in-time purchases, and so actually we have half of the export this year in compared to the previous year from Georgia. I want you to understand what we're speaking about. And so, of course, COVID has created bigger problems, and last year problems also were transferred to current year. But I hope that very soon the demand will start growing again, during the next seasons, and we hope that we will be able to recover. We are happy that Ferrero company increased the purchase of hazelnuts in Georgia. This means that share of quality product increases in Georgia because they are not buying the product of low quality. So you can see here the statistical information position of Georgia in 2020-2021. We were about at the fourth position after Azerbaijan, and you see here the Turkey and Italy are the lead pole positions. Let's say they are leading producers of hazelnut. As for the third, fourth, and fifth positions, they are this is varying by the seasons, depending on the volumes and the quality of the yield. And for instance, Chile is expecting very high quality product, and United States will also grow probably, while Georgia will drop down. But we still hope that we will retain our place in top 5. This is also statistical information which I would like to share with you. This is the demand, the hazelnut consumption, which was growing for the years, but now we are kind of stagnation. We see the reason for this in this war, because war impacted the capacities of people to consume. We've been discussing this very trends of growing the consumption throughout the countries, and I want to share with the small details. Such a large countries like, for instance, China, India, their growth in percentage is very small. However, if we express it in the actual quantity terms, the growth is quite significant, and this allows us to have a hope that in the nearest years, this trend that was they had a 5 to 7% growth, annual growth. We hope that this trend will continue in the future, or even will increase. Very often I receive the questions: how do you see the hazelnut sector in the future? What do you think about its development? And they are asking me, is it worth to invest in this sector or not? And my answer is that yes, we have the resources to grow. We have the resources even to increase the exports of hazelnuts from Georgia, and these are the same data, the growth data. If you are interested, I can share this presentation later with you. Also, it's very interesting that in Ukraine, as our colleagues mentioned, we observe very significant growth of areas covered by the hazelnut orchards. Today, one woman asked me here, when you are helping Ukrainians with growing hazelnut production, don't you help your competitors? But believe me, competition in hazelnut is not measured like this. We have our niche. We have food product. It has its own taste properties, and when some client likes Georgian hazelnut, and he will remain your faithful consumer if you continue sustaining the qualities he is asking for. Now I would like to speak about specificities of our sector. We have very significant assistance from the state, from the Ministry of Agriculture, as well as from the donor organizations. For the years, we have created first model of value chain in 2013. There's a farmer, drying facility, processing meal, and then export. So this change should exist in Georgia in order to ensure the decent revenues for everybody and to have this properly functioning system. So our biggest challenge with regards to the sting bag was the lack of the drying and processing infrastructure. This, of course, impacts the quality of a product, and the quality starts deteriorating very soon if it is not properly processed. So also, unfortunately, in the western Georgia, activity of farmers in taking care of the hazelnut orchards is very low, which also deteriorates the quality. And in order to resolve these two problems, we are taking some actions. We are already for several years building the drying facilities, processing facilities, and we are receiving 50% grant from the state, and also there is a co-funding of the interest rate in banks. And this year, the state came up with the unprecedented initiative for the hazelnut when they are giving farmers to receive 50% grant to purchase the necessary inputs, for instance, the chemicals and fertilizers. Actually, small Georgian farmers who have their own orchard up to 3 hectares for the next year, they can actually work without any financial cost, and they can grow with the highest quality nuts, which will be actually the breaking point for our development of our industry. The next season for Georgian hazelnut sector shall show what potential can be achieved as a sector, because actually all the minimum platform necessary for this is already been created. We gave farmers the machinery for applying the pesticides, and also they have the access to the inputs. And this form of subsidization is very interesting. This is actually a stimulation of work and not stimulation of sales, which is often very negative for the sectors based on our own experience. So if you want to show you our figures, we have about 70,000 hectares of these orchards, and our export makes only 40,000 tons, which allows everybody to understand that our production per hectare is very low. When industrial orchards give 2.5-3 tons per hectare, in many cases the average farmer can harvest only 0.5 tons, and so growth potential here is very serious. This is our first target is to achieve 1.5 tons per hectare. It can be achieved very rapidly, just within 2 seasons, if we take care properly of our orchard. This will be very rapidly increasing up to this 1.5 tons. And so based on this calculation, we think that our goal for the near future is that Georgia should go up to 100,000 tons in order to become the important player in the international market, and we shall somehow strengthen our position and to create a niche which will be kept for us at the European market, and not only European. I would like to speak about also our friendship format. And together with our Ukrainian partners, we are participating in Odessa in hazelnut orchard building project that we have launched in 2013 together with Max and Henadiy. We have conducted many joint activities and created very high quality orchard in Odessa. And we've been exchanging our experience, and we have strengthened our human relations, and we are very proud of our friends, of our partners. We wish them victory, and we are really supporting. Georgian people is supporting Ukrainian people, and we are very happy that we were able to invite for the first time to Georgia such producers of such a large producers of chocolate like Roshen, Ukrainian company, and we are starting business relations with them. We are trying to produce Ukrainian chocolate with Georgian hazelnut. That's also a very interesting factor. And our meeting is actually one of the starting days for such relations. So welcome everybody, and wish success to our Ukrainian partners. So this is our export data. I thought it would be interesting for you. These are data of 2022, and also you can see that export has reduced, and you see what are the indicators in our relations with Ukraine. We had 525 tons in last year. This year it's a little bit less, but still the season is ahead, and I hope that partners will help us in increasing this figure. We know and we clearly see that the season will be full of challenges, and export will not be as high as we had last year. However, we think that in Georgia, carryover will not happen, and for this, I think all the exporters shall work for, and this is a very complex process that has very many components, but we still retain a hope, and we think that despite this challenge, we'll be able to increase our exports to Europe. And thank you very much for your attention.
გამარჯობათ, მოგესალმებით.
Welcome everybody. First of all, I would like to thank all of you organizers for organizing, for inviting me to such an interesting conference, and I also would like to thank a lot the Ukrainian party because they were able to join us in such a difficult situation and share their experience with us. Wish you success and wish you victory. Now I would like to make a brief presentation about the almond industry in Georgia. However, before that, I would like to say about our program. I am representing the agricultural program of USAID. I'm manager of the value chain, and also I would like to stress the role of USAID in development of the sector. During the last couple of years, we are very deeply involved in this nuts industry in Georgia, and especially these commercially new crops like walnut and almonds. And we work both with growers, with the processors. We were organizing various trainings. We had foreign experts. So they were sharing with us experience from California, from Spain. Also had some grant programs, and I'm really proud that today my colleagues will also speak about this, about 6 walnut out of 6 walnut processing facilities in Georgia, four have received our grants, and we are having very intensive communication with them, and we are providing technical assistance too. As for the almond industry, we have already mentioned, and my previous speakers also said this. This is a new industry for Georgia, and I hope that for the next 5 or 10 years, when we will be gathering, we will see the figures and data as impressive as we could see in the Hazelnut presentation today. And I hope that in the next years, the Georgian almond industry will be as successful at the global market as Hazelnut is today. Now, as for my presentation itself, I will briefly review Georgian almond industry, and once again I would like to stress the role of agricultural development, the rural development agency in this field. So whatever we speak about, will it be walnut or almond? Exactly, this program was the main provider of main incentives for this sector, and under this program, very intensively, we are building almond orchards recently. If you look at the statistics, for instance, we can see the areas of these orchards. So of course the walnut orchards are also built daily, but the pace in almond industry is higher, and it's growing much quicker than in the walnuts. Here is only part of the statistics, so I know a few large investors in this sector. I know representatives of the sector who are also planning to build 500, 700 hectares of new orchards in the spring. That's very when I say that Georgian almond industry will take its decent place in the global industry, it might sound ambitious because now 75% of almonds globally are produced in United States, in California. But if we continue like we are doing now, we might enter into the top 10. Of course, our share might be just 1%, but still, we already become visible, and this 1% will be very important in this industry. I forgot to mention about areas. With the help of the agency, we have built about 3,800 hectares of almond orchards. However, we also have private investors here, purely private investors, and if we take them into account, we have total area of about 6,000 hectares. And also these orchards are built from year to year, and they already start giving the fruits, and I hope that we will have much increased productivity within the nearest years. As for the distribution by the regions, I wanted to show this slide because we have our Ukrainian friends. They shall understand where we are developing orchards. You can see the Georgian map, and mainly almond is developed. Almond industry is developing in eastern Georgia for regions: Kateryna, Shida, Kvemo, and Tbilisi. So this is actually this. You see this belt in which the 95% of the orchards are built within this area. So you know that the almond does not like high humidity. Therefore it's more eastern crop, and you can't even see in the western Georgia any almond orchards. So leader is Kateryna, which has 44% of the existing orchards. Then Kvemo, then Shida, and also we see certain areas in Tbilisi region too. As for the varieties, I personally am basing on this. Actually, this is the results of the survey of our association that are trying to update the database, and so actually these leading varieties are Supernova, Guara, Soleta, Avihor, Loren, and Ferranie. And to see the trends within the recent years, we more frequently see the varieties like Penta, Mardia, Macaco. These are Spanish varieties. And for instance, I have mentioned a few large investments that are planned for the next year. We will have new orchards. The orchards are fully concentrated on these varieties. When I say new, they are new for Georgia, but in Spain they are using these varieties for quite a long time. So they are news for Georgia, but not globally. Now, if we look at the figures, what is the international trade in almond? I would say that it's a bit early to speak about this because the first commercial and actually significant production we had this year. We will know the statistics better in a couple of years, and actually exports and imports were registered quite rather chaotically up to now, and you can see only import data because actually export is not complying with any logic so far. And even for the imports, we see that kernel import since 2020 increases. However, this is not for the local consumption. About 900 tons of kernel is re-exported. About 500 tons are re-exported to Armenia and Uzbekistan. But that's also a positive trend because we are importing almond here. We are locally processing it. We add the value to this product and then export it to the other countries. But I hope that from the next years, if we look at the international trade statistics, we will see already the export of local varieties, and we'll see how Georgian experts will do on these markets. As for the prices of the imported almonds, these are the average data, and you can see that the prices of kernel and unshelled. Actually, we might see that one would think that kernel price should be higher. But you know, the thing is that the import of the unshelled almond is done in very small quantities. Somebody, if they import, for instance, 100 kilos, their expenses might be much higher. Now, as for the kernel is mainly imported from California, and I think that it's quite realistic price. If we look at this, it's about $3.7 in average. So when I show the statistics to Georgian consumers, they are dissatisfied often, and of course we cannot now say what was the quality of this kernel imported from California for $3.7. Maybe it's not a very high quality, but even without this, the prices are going down at the global market for the last 4 to 5 years, and currently the price the European market is for 4 to 5 euros. And now I would like to say a couple of words about the local production and about the yield of this year. Last year we had about 900 tons of unshelled almond, and this year, based on the survey, and I have communication with the large producers, they were expecting about 2,500 tons of the unshelled almonds. So this 2,500 of unshelled, it means about 800, 900 tons of kernel, and I would say that that's more than enough for the local market. Before we developed the almond consumption culture in Georgia, we know that we are consuming a lot of walnuts because it's used in our cuisine and it's popular among tourists. We do not have high consumption of almonds, so therefore we shall, I think we shall start export of almond, and so therefore I think that it's very doubtful that these volumes will be demanded at the local level, even those volumes, small volumes, which we have this year. So therefore, in my opinion, the industry shall already start thinking about exporting. As for the processing, currently we have only one processor which is equipped with a modern technology. They've been built this year, and they have capacity of processing 1,500 tons per season. Although there are some smaller crushers that are imported for Turkey mainly, these crushing devices but they do not have high outputs, and they are breaking down often, and they are also damaging the quality of the kernel. However, we also have the few smaller facilities. As for the price of crushing, shelling the almond, I have seen it at one of these modern facilities, and so if farmers are interested in this, 1 kilo, shelling 1 kilo of almond makes 1 lari. As for the price of kernel and unshelled, you can see it on the screen. And when I've been surveying the local producers, they told me that unshelled almond is 5.5 lari, on average, plus minus, while the price of kernel was 18 to 20 lari per kilo. And I would say once again that I hope that you won't be angry with me, that I would say that this 5.5 lari, to some extent, it's it's much higher if we compare it with the prices at European and Spanish markets. So in the future, when the market opens and we start exporting almonds to the international markets, I think that these prices might even go down if we look at the current global trends. Because we know what is the global market and the price at the global market, we shall also have the same price, probably, I would say. So I would also like to mention now a few challenges. First one is need of the extension network. We include here education. Education in this field. I would like to repeat once again that we are speaking about almonds and walnuts. We speak about intensive orchards, and we didn't have much experience in this. However, within the last 5 to 6 years, despite many mistakes made, we have learned a lot, both in walnuts production and in almond production. We had many failure stories. However, we have accumulated certain knowledge already. And this was done with the help of donor organizations, with the help of many private large projects, and it would be very nice. And I hope that this experience and this knowledge that unfortunately is accumulated partly in companies, partly in donors, it would be good if we would be able to consolidate this knowledge and if we would be able to create some kind of an extension services, extension centers that would cover the entire sector. And I hope that the association is very actively working on this currently, I know, and I hope that the association will manage to do this. That's actually their function. They should be providing consolidated information to the sector. Also, since this is the new area of work in Georgia, of course, it's natural that we had some mistakes, some errors. And I speak about mistakes when I discuss the planting materials. For instance, the saplings purchased from local nurseries were of low quality. They dried and actually did not grow, and it's very difficult when the farmer is making such a huge investment. If they will have to replant part of the garden to replace part of the saplings, and if they will have to do this every year, that's of course very huge financial burden, and that's why we can see quite a pessimistic wave in the industry. However, recently we've been working very actively on improving the quality of the seedlings, planting materials, and so that's I think that we have already accumulated quite a knowledge from this standpoint, and it is possible now to do better. Unfortunately, our knowledge is based upon our own mistakes, but still we can do this now. Also, we shall already start thinking about developing the processing industries. I told you that this year we had only one processing plant. I have information that next year they are planning to launch one new large processor. It requires, of course, specific knowledge, specific experience. This can be the experience of the international experts. That will actually help us and help our sector, because this year the almond processing has started, but there were many gaps, deficiencies. Because we didn't have experience, there are problems in management, there are problems in building the processing lines, etc. But I'm sure we will overcome this, and from the next year we will start doing better. And once more, I would like to stress this some kind of unrealistic expectations which we had, especially some few years ago. These unrealistic expectations they had among farmers when they were launching the project, when they were building orchards. They had a little bit high expectations with regards to the price, I can understand these farmers because 5 to 6 years ago, price of almond was growing, and about in 2017, it showed the highest prices within last 20 years. So maybe that was their intention, but since 2017, the price is coming back down, and therefore this often causes forces farmers to leave the industry. And I'm a member of this on the online platform, and I'm in the many WhatsApp groups, and very often I can see this. You can see advertising that they are selling small orchards, and that's very sad. However, those mistakes that were made years ago because they didn't have sufficient information, today these mistakes become very a heavy financial burden for these farmers, and that's why they are forced to leave this industry. And I would say also a couple of words, and we have to work more on the international markets. As for the walnuts, I'm very happy, and my following speaker will speak, that this year we are selling local walnuts at the local market. Maybe in the future we'll be able also to sell at the local market, but the almond requires to find access to international markets, and we shall consider various opportunities, whether it be Europe, Asia, or Turkey, especially within the recent period when I am meeting the representatives of the industry. A few large producers are already considering Turkey, and Turkey is also a very interesting market because they are importing approximately half of their consumption from United States, and we should also take into consideration that for United States they have additional taxes, and so there are some prospects which we shall think of, which we shall try to find. And I think will it be support from state, support from donors, or the private sector itself can overcome these challenges. And when we come together here in 5 years, I have that we'll be discussing larger figures when we speak about the almond expert from Georgia. Thank you very much. This was my presentation, and we can answer the questions later if you will have any. Welcome everybody. I would like to thank each of you as well as the organizers of this great opportunity. Such meetings are of course extremely important, and I would like to thank our colleagues from Ukraine and wish you victory. And now as for to speak about the walnuts, as my colleague Levan already said about almond, we have different situation in our sector because walnuts are there is a relatively higher demand, and we have quite a good consumption culture in Georgia for these crops. I would like to show you how walnuts are built, or walnut orchards are built in our country. Mainly we have these orchards in Kateryna. There we have 5,100 hectares in total, and so the distribution is following by the regions. 42% in Kateryna, in Kvemo Kartli 25%, in Shida Kartli 39%, and it goes down a little by little towards the western direction. As for the varieties used here, these are mainly Chandler walnuts that are most demanded at the global level, and the climate that we have here are most suitable for this Chandler. And not every country can produce it because this variety is very sensitive to the frost, but we have good opportunity of developing this variety, and 95% of our walnuts are exactly of this Chandler variety. As for our production, expected yield. So forecasted yield in 2022, we were expecting 2,500 tons. However, we think that this will be much lower, but we'll be able to show you the accurate figures by the end of the December. And so new orchards for the first 7 to 8 years are increasing their yield about 3 times for this period of the first 7 to 8 years. So we expect to go to reach these figures by 2025. But this is not very high, but still it's very important to produce it and to compete. And who we are competing with today, mainly for those who are interested in export, all of them try to pay as low price as possible, and they're comparing us with the countries with the countries who are producing a lower quality product, like United States, like Chile, like China, Kazakhstan. Such countries who are producing the lower quality product, their product, of course, costs less. The price is lower, but our goal is this Chandler variety. We want to compete with Europe, whose prices are about 3.5 to 4.5 euros at the current global market. So therefore, our goal is to create high-quality product, and we want to compete with Europe, not with the lower-class producers like United States or China. As for our price analysis, so what happened this year, if we analyze what happened this year and what was our outcomes this year, we can say that we are quite close to European prices. For instance, what Europe was paying for the high category, high quality product, we have actually the same price at the local market, which is very high motivation for farmers to further increase the volumes. And as for the unshelled walnut, it's about $3.5. And as for the kernel itself, its price is about $9.5, which is quite interesting and which gives us a hope. As for the productivity and what we are expecting and what challenges we are facing, we think that this year actually maximum, so our product will be sufficient for the internal market only by the end till the end of December, and after that we will have to import again, because these yields we are collecting within the country cannot cover internal demand. So therefore we think that the next 2 years we will still need an import, because the demand is so high. Before pandemic, it was 3,000 tons, demand for 3,000 tons. And in the period of pandemic, it reduced to 1,100 tons. And based on our data, we need another 2 years to satisfy local demand, and if we have realistic expectations, of course. So therefore, the walnut and the kernel are even more interesting and are more prospective, because we have very high local consumption, and we believe that more and more orchards will be built, and the demand for new orchards will also grow. Main challenges we are facing, agronomical part, actually we have overcome this difficulty. We already passed the stage. We already have accumulated experience in our country, what to do, how to take care of this. However, that's still one of the challenges. And also the good news is that practically the small farmers, so half hectare, 1 hectare farmers, we don't have them at all, practically at all, and so our orchards are mainly 5 hectares and above, which allows farmers to be more business oriented. It's not subsistence farming already, and this is business farming, and they are interested in investing in order to increase their productivity. The second challenge is the lack of the processing industry. Currently we have 6 European level processing facilities. We can say that rural development all of them actually were built with the support of Rural Development Agency, as well as with the help of USAID agricultural program. And all 6 processors create high quality product and satisfy all the requirements of European market. So therefore, for the next 5 years, we will not have any problems with processing in our country. Especially, unlike the almond. In almond we have very difficult situation and we need much higher capacities. While in the walnuts, we have overcome this difficulty. We already have sufficient capacity for the time being at least. And also what we want to do now, we want to start exporting, despite the fact that for the next 2 years we are expecting that mainly sales will be directed towards satisfying the local demand, but we are already preparing for the export. For instance, this year we will export to 3 countries. This will be very small volumes, but we just want to create some foundation, some grounds to develop these exports in the future years. As for the processing industry, one of the main challenges here is that we are producing now the raw materials, and the raw is has a very low profit margin. So therefore, our main strategic direction is developing of secondary production, which and we'll have to work with the state on this to develop the secondary production, which means that shelled and unshelled walnuts should become a product with the added value. And with regards to the sales, we also can say that we are dealing with various markets, and with the support of the Rural Development Agency and with the support of Produce in Georgia, we are arranging some exhibitions, and large farmers and large processors are participating in such exhibitions. And we want to establish relations and make the long-term contracts with the various countries. Now, as for the supply, we have already said this, but we want to say that what we are expecting now, we can satisfy the demand within the 5 years on the local market. We were expecting about 2,300 tons for this year, but we will have lower volumes. And we've been planning to export around 200 tons. But internal demand, the domestic demand is so high that we will be exporting much less than we've been planning, because all the walnuts are mainly sold at the local market. So what is our vision? What our main potential markets are? This is Europe and Gulf countries. This is our main vision. These markets are much more stable. They are higher price markets. That's why we're trying to find our ways to these markets. we are trying to sell to them. As for the quality, our product is no doubt European quality. It's comparable with French, Italian, Spanish products, and we can say that this is of a really high quality product. That actually we can say that in Georgian market we are seeing only Georgian product today. Thank you very much for attention and for giving me opportunity to speak with you.